Hi everyone, episode 36 is a little late, but here it is, covering September and October '88, which means we've finally reached the Japanese release date for the big one. Yep, the big kahuna of the Nintendo Entertainment System, Shigeru Miyamoto's 8-bit masterpiece, a game that set the standard for the platforming genre. Also, we've got a bunch of crap, and another little respected US publisher makes its debut. But some of this stuff is pretty weird and interesting, even if it's not very good, so let's get a move on. Okay, let's kick this off with a rather off-the-wall animated intro in which New York City and the Roman Colosseum are floating in the clouds, and Donald Duck pilots a small airplane between them. Hey, why doesn't he just fly from one cloud to the other? I mean, he's a duck, right? Now, Donald Duck is a Disney game from Kemco. I guess the Japanese rights for Disney characters passed from Hudson to Kemco, and then later ended up with Capcom. Remember the Kemco Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle games on the Game Boy? The first few were actually Mickey Mouse games in Japan. Anyway, Donald Duck is a short little track and field style minigame collection. First up is Sack Race. Where are we anyway? Naples? Or maybe Sicily? That volcano in the background looks kind of like Mount Etna to me. Daisy Duck looks really unhappy for some reason in this game. She does not want to be sack racing. Then here we have boot throwing in Rome. Just like the hammer throw in track and field 2, you have to move around your thumb on the D-pad. Oh yeah, and don't forget pogo stick hurdles at the Roman Forum. This event really bites. I don't know why it's so damn hard to jump over those things. You always either hit the front of the wall or you hit the top, just as you're jumping over. And now we're in front of the Castle San Angelo, pole vaulting over the Tiber River. This is just like the pole vaulting in track and field, only the timing is much fussier and you land in the river most of the time. Nice parallax scrolling, however. Or, I guess, fake parallax scrolling. Now we move on to Pisa for the pizza carrying event. Pizza and Pisa, get it? Though these actually look like donuts to me. It's a totally pointless event that involves simply moving very slowly. And I love this event. You're on a boat in the Grand Canal trying to push each other off the boat into the water. And once again, look at Daisy's face. It's like being in this game has robbed her of the will to live. Donald Duck was only released in Japan, but I can hear you saying, I've seen this before somewhere. And that's because in the US, Kemco released it as Snoopy's Sports Spectacular, though the title screen simply calls it Snoopy. It's really just the same game with different sprites. You know, despite Peanuts being enormously popular and the characters appearing on every single kind of merchandise, you don't really see many Peanuts video games now, do ya? Though Kemco did release a few Snoopy games on the Game Boy. Yeah, so in conclusion, this is a silly little collection of mini-games which looks pretty lame compared to Track and Field 2, which was released just about 1 week before this one. It's 8 Eyes. On the title screen is what we call a green grocer's apostrophe. The unnecessary apostrophe originated in the Japanese version. I guess that's understandable, but it wasn't changed for the US release, except on the cover art. It was fixed there. So we start off here, we're going to get a Mega Man-like stage selection screen. You can start on any level except the final level, the House of Ruth. Rather unfortunate name choice, since in the United States, the House of Ruth is a non-profit organization for battered women. Or it actually has a pretty good jumping animation. Relatively detailed. So 8 Eyes greatly resembles Castlevania, now doesn't it? Or is a bit like Simon Belmont, except he has a teeny weeny short little dagger instead of a big long whip. One thing Simon Belmont didn't have is a hawk. Or is it a falcon? Hard to say. The hawk's name is Kutris, and is good for hitting certain enemies or switches on walls that you can't otherwise reach. This guy, for example, Your dagger does no damage, you have to use the hawk to attack him. Here's the thing though, in the regular one-player mode you don't actually control Kutris directly, he just sort of flies back and forth by himself, though you can make him perform a diving attack. I accidentally used his special weapon there, that was that white thing rolling around on the ground. Yeah, there are special weapons, as well as hidden items in the walls. Here's the incredibly boring looking boss. I'm gonna use my freeze weapon on him. One cool thing about 8 Eyes are these crazy between level cutscenes, where a skeleton waiter serves you and the boss some refreshments. I guess this is like a weird Brechtian distancing technique type gag, showing the actors between the takes, kinda like Castlevania did with its closing credits. Now if Castlevania annoyed you with its Medusa heads, prepare to go full ballistic on 8 Eyes, because there are all kinds of crazy flying or jumping enemies that often move in strange, hard to hit patterns. To make matters worse, your weapon has almost no range. It's much shorter than Belmont's whip, and most enemies' weapons have a longer range than your dagger. To hit an enemy, need to watch its attack patterns, and then sneak in and get a hit in, when they have their weapon drawn back. Here's a clever part, you have to use Kutris to activate that wall switch while you stand by the door and then run in real quick. So, despite 8 Eyes' similarity to Castlevania, I'd say it sort of falls short of Konami's game. It suffers from a sort of visual monotony. Castlevania starts you off in this great huge long hall with giant pillars and windows. There was a great sense of atmosphere in that game. You had this enormous decaying castle with bridges, towers, all kinds of stuff. 8 Eyes, however, just seems to be a series of boring rooms connected by stairways. At least that's the impression I get from what I've played. There's really not much variety in the level designs. It feels very repetitive. On the positive side, it has really good music, and a lot of it. Each level has about 3 different musical themes. The critical opinion on 8 Eyes seems pretty mixed. On Moby Games, the critics' reviews range from 0 to 100 on a scale of 100. It certainly has its fans, and some folks even feel it's better than Castlevania. I guess I liked 8 Eyes okay, but the whole Falcon thing doesn't really work that well, at least in the one-player version. For 2 players, the second player controls the Falcon, though that person obviously gets stuck with a crappy job. Also, there's really not a whole lot of special weapons ammo, or the special weapons just suck up way too much ammo. You can use your freeze ball only like maybe 3 or 4 times, and then you'll be out of ammo. 8 Eyes was made by Thinking Rabbit, who are mostly known for Silkban. I really wished I liked 8 Eyes better than I did. It seems like a technically well-made game that didn't quite hit its mark. I guess my recommendation is try it, and maybe you'll like it. Well, this certainly looks like a Namco game, based solely on the title screen. Has that rainbow effect going on, and the whole thing sorta fits in with the title screens of their family sports games. Namco seems to like a certain amount of consistency in their releases, like the way they would number them on the boxes. Well, this is another adventure game, Erika to Satoru no Yume Bouken, or Erika and Satoru's Dream Adventure, starring Erika and Satoru, who I guess are twins, and their adventure is about them going into a magical fairy dreamland of some sort. The game's intro, which is very nicely done, by the way, has this sort of ethereal, dreamy music going on. Shows the kids following this mysterious cat-like creature into the dream world. Basically, it's a lot like Alice in Wonderland. The game was developed by Atlus. If nothing else, Atlus made games that look good. Nice effect with the wind blowing the leaves there. Erika to Satoru eschews the typical list of commands running down the right-hand side, and instead has some icons down in the bottom right corner. Move, look, talk, inventory, take, and so on. However, the unusual thing about this game is that it's for 2 players. In the 2-player mode, one player controls Erika, and the other Satoru. Each has their own individual screen up at top. In 1-player mode, you control both, and switch back and forth between the 2 using the select button. Often both characters will need to be in the same location at the same time in order to interact with NPCs. Occasionally there are quiz segments. I'm being asked a question here about Kodiak bears. But the game is mostly the usual talk, pick up items, use items, that style of gameplay we've seen before. And despite the unusual two-player mode, Erika to Satoru has achieved notoriety for one particular thing: a hidden message put in by one of the programmers. The message can be accessed by completing the game, waiting a long time, and then entering an arcane series of button presses. The game will actually then play some music from LJN's Karate Kid, also developed by Atlas. It will then display a rather long message in which the programmer both compliments and complains about various coworkers. Here's a little bit as translated by Kevin Gifford of Magweasel and iHeart PC Engine. First off, Kaoru Ogura, who ran off with some guy in the middle of a project. Yes, you bastard. Don't show up at the office without showering after having sex 6 times the previous night. Next, Tatsuya Ohashi. Yes, you bastard. Don't give me your flippant shit. Coming in late on the day we ship the ROM like nothing's amiss. You can bring me all the porn you want. I'm not forgetting that one. All that fucking weight you put on. No wonder you paid out 18,000 yen, still got nothing but a kiss out of it. Kenji Takano, Namco debugger. You're a part-timer, don't dick around with my project planner. And finally, Kiyoharu Goto, the biggest thorn in my side in this project. Yes, you bastard. Once I get a time machine, I'm sending you back to the Edo period. Go do your riddles over there. Supposedly, Ogura, the lady he accused of not showering after sex, was the same person who programmed those minigame segments in Karate Kid. He also has praise for various people, including Okada-san, probably Koji Okada, founder of Atlas, though he adds, "I know all about your abnormal tendencies," whatever exactly that means. This has got to be one of the greatest video game Easter eggs of all time. The game itself, however, is pretty much forgotten. Whoa, look at all that copyright and licensing information. From Pack-In Video, it's Knight Rider, naturally released in the US by Schlockmeister's Acclaim. Here we see Kit and Michael wearing his skinny jeans. That stupid hipster. The introductory cutscene sets up the game's plot. Michael's bitching about having to end his vacation early just because terrorists stole some stupid top-secret military weapons, including the PIV bomb. The PIV bomb? Yeah, Knight Rider is an early example of the Solid Snake style of dialogue writing. So it's up to you to chase down these terrorists. As you can see by the map, you'll be driving all over the country. But first, you need to power up Kit. At the beginning of each level you get one attribute point to spend, so it's sort of like a driving RPG. We'll start with a shield because that sounds important. The lasers and missiles aren't really needed this early in the game. Now it should be mentioned, despite the fact that we've seen numerous Nintendo games with speech samples, and despite the fact that the main appeal of Knight Rider is a talking car, Kit does not actually talk in this game. We're on the road after terrorists. Terrorists so well organized, armed, and plentiful, they just attacked and looted an army base. Still, you should be able to take them on all by yourself because you have a talking car with a machine gun. When you see those red cars, those are the terrorist cars, by the way. Oh, and look, here's an upgrade van, just like in Spy Hunter. Knight Rider is sort of like a remake of Spy Hunter in a way. This is basically a timed race. You need to get to the end before your fuel or time runs out. Then you get to a boss battle. It's not too demanding, just sort of try to stay on the side and hit him while avoiding his shots. If you lose your shields completely, then you'll die. At this point you might think you screwed up and didn't kill him quickly enough, but no, it's a scripted event. He always gets away. For the second stretch, you chase the terrorists to Seattle. Now probably you all know what Knight Rider is, but if not, well, it was a TV show that ran from 1982 to 1986, and that starred a crime-fighting talking car called Kit. Also, David Hasselhoff was in the show for some reason. So it had been off the air for a couple of years when this game came out. Now, I know what you're thinking, that I'm going to make some cracks about how this must have been popular in Germany because David Hasselhoff is huge over there or something, but I'll let you in on a little secret. Yeah, Hasselhoff had a recording career in Europe, But in reality, he's just a smokescreen to distract us from the even more embarrassing stuff that was really popular back then. For example, the Kelly family. That was a bunch of New England hippies who moved to Europe back in the 70s and made all their kids dress in funny outfits, and then became huge in Germany, Benelux, Switzerland, and those places. You know how many albums these guys sold? 20 million, and they played like huge arenas. But I have to admire their dedicated uncoolness. Like this album cover. When do you think this came out? I don't know, Dr. Sparkle, maybe 76, 77? Try 1997. So while you were listening to OK Computer or something, this was flying off the shelves in German-speaking countries. So anyway, sorry for going off like that. So anyway, there was actually an earlier Knight Rider game, a computer game from Ocean, which does look a lot like the NES game. I mean, they appear to be officially different games. However, I mean, what else is a Knight Rider game going to look like other than you driving around in Sightkit shooting stuff? Alright, so we're headed to Seattle. When you see those yellow cars, you should shoot them because they'll drop something, like a time limit increase, fuel, shield refill, or missiles and laser weapons. You don't really need to shoot the red cars since they do absolutely nothing. It's probably easier and safer just to drive around them. So you fight the damn truck again, and then it's off to Salt Lake. Bonnie is pretty rude to you here. She casts aspersions on your driving abilities. It's funny, Knight Rider is sort of a crappy cash-in game, but I do like the multiple encounters with a terrorist truck. It escapes twice, and then the third time you encounter it, you finally get to blow it up. It gives you a feeling of satisfaction, like killing Bowser's from Mario Brothers. And this is definitely not a great game, but I ended up liking it more than I thought I would. We're about ready to close out September 1988. The last Japanese release that month was Viva Las Vegas. Man, that's one ugly version of the US flag. Published by Epic Sony, the record company, who also released a handful of other Famicom games so far, but developed by HAL, who released this game themselves in the US as Vegas Dream. The cool little intro shows the shadowy gambler's airplane taking off and then approaching the glittering desert hellhole that is Las Vegas. To anyone out there who's from Las Vegas, just kidding, Vegas isn't really that bad. But what is bad is the paint job on the airplane's interior. I mean, my god, who'd actually decorate an airplane cabin like that? Ah, here's the Vegas skyline. The stage select screen gives you a view of the Vegas Strip. See, even though these early HAL games were not exactly fantastic, they put some extra effort into them. So you pick your name. I'm going to be Mr. Sparkle this time. Then you choose your game. You have the choice of 4 different games altogether. Now here's a hot tip. Start off by choosing slots. The jackpot bar game seems to be deliberately broken in order to allow you to build up a decent bankroll pretty quickly. Just keep putting money in and you're almost guaranteed to make quite a bit of money back. The odds are really in your favor, unlike, real slot machines. I'll just keep going $50 each time until I finally win something. Seems like you usually get a jackpot like every, 5 or 6 tries. And the security guard is always impressed when you win. You can go from $700 to several $1,000s in like literally a matter of minutes. And then that's sort of when things will start getting interesting. Certain events will happen during Vegas Dream. This person will come up to you and offer you something, such as a unique gambling event. This guy will play 1 round of roulette with you. Of course, the odds are 50-50, but if you lose, he'll be dismissive of your gambling skills, and if you win, he'll say, "Wow, you're better than I expected." I mean, better? We just bet on red or black at roulette. That's pure luck. Doesn't mean you're a good gambler if you somehow win. Not to make gross generalizations, but is that like an Asian thing? If you've ever seen Chinese movies like God of Gamblers or that sort of thing, they always depict great gamblers as being impossibly lucky. They just somehow always manage to get like a perfect poker hand every time, as if luck were some kind of acquired skill that gamblers can work on perfecting. Well, speaking of luck, I found it hard to win at blackjack. The dealer seems to always get 20. Maybe this is just a coincidence, but I played like 10 hands of blackjack on this, and they came up with 20 like 6 or 7 times. I don't know, maybe Hal programmed it this way on purpose. We'll try this again. Oh, I got 20 this time. And the dealer gets 20 as well. Now, not all events are gambling based. You can win or lose money in situations like this, where you're offered to go see a Vegas show. You'll either win the lottery or have your money stolen by the lady escorting you. Does Vegas even have shows like this anymore? Nowadays, Vegas mostly seems to be the place where old musical acts and comedians go to die. You see all these billboards in Vegas and you're like, geez, Carrot Top is still around? And I love the fact that things like someone winning some money in a raffle or someone getting conned out of $200 makes the top of the evening news here. Other than 21 in slots, there's roulette, and worst of all, Keno. Avoid Keno like the plague. It's funny, ever since the dawn of the video game, people have been making gambling games like this, and I'm really not sure why. I guess some people like gambling and don't want to worry about losing real money. I suppose this is the best gambling game we've seen so far. I mean, not that there's that much competition. It's certainly more fun than those pachinko games, but at least Hal added some additional content like the various NPCs that you interact with, so I guess the game pretty much succeeds at what it's trying to do. That's it for September in Japan, but what's this? Jeopardy! The video game, released in the US in September 1988 by GameTech, who has the honor of being the 4th US-based publisher to emerge for the console, after LJN, Acclaim, and Tengen. So this game never had a Japanese release, and it was aimed squarely at the US market. It was developed by Guns for Hire, Rare. There's a stock market ticker along the bottom giving you all the copyright info, in case you missed it on the title screen. Then you choose the number of players, up to 3, difficulty, name, choose your on-screen character representation, and so on. This music reminds me a lot of Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. It has the same sort of rhythm. You get to choose between a few goofy-looking characters. I guess I'll pick the guy with the way too short tie. A few different male characters as well as female characters. So the game starts, you pick a category, dollar amount, and press the D-pad to ring the buzzer. Now the fun part, use your D-pad to type out an answer. Oh boy, that's a lot of work. This is like when you set up your Xbox 360 and you're creating your username and password and setting up the router and all that kind of stuff. It's a whole game of that, basically. The fact that you have to type in all these answers leads to an obvious problem, namely spelling. Like here, everyone knows the answer is Pharaoh, but does everyone know how to spell Pharaoh? Is it O-A-H or A-O-H? In real life Jeopardy, I think the contestants get a lot of leeway when they're writing down answers for Final Jeopardy, but here, not so much, in fact, pretty much none at all. And there is at least one spelling error in the game. I got the wrong answer about the song Waltzing Matilda, based on the spelling of Matilda, because I didn't spell it with an H. But the song itself spells Matilda without the H, so rather sloppy work, Rare. One weird thing, when a computer-controlled contestant doesn't have a correct answer, they'll just type in a bunch of gibberish. Jeopardy is more or less a port of the existing Jeopardy computer game by Share Data. The game's layout and some of the characters are all based on the earlier computer game versions. The electronic game rights to Jeopardy were owned by a company called IJE. They licensed the rights to Share Data, but then a little later created GameTech to release console games, many of which were based on the game shows that they owned the electronic rights to. Here's another question I really don't like, since Robert Fitzooth, assuming he was even a real person, was definitely not Robin Hood in real life. Many of the questions are pretty easy, but some are definitely dated. Like these questions about 80s TV shows. I mean, does anyone really remember Simon and Simon nowadays? Final Jeopardy can be a bit awkward, as when you're playing with other people, you actually have to look away or close your eyes while the others are typing in their answers and their wagers. Since wagers and answers are entered at separate times, I guess you have to close your eyes twice. Undoubtedly, many accusations of cheating arose when playing Final Jeopardy back then. I suppose the main problem is simply that the NES isn't a very good platform for this sort of game, due to all the typing required. And there are far more playable versions of Jeopardy available nowadays, so unfortunately, history has not really been kind to this one. Oh shit, I accidentally loaded up the same game twice. No, wait a sec. This isn't Jeopardy. It's Wheel of Fortune. Pretty nice sounding speech sample there. Yep, another Merv Griffin produced game show gets converted into video game format by Rare and GameTech. The game options are quite similar to Jeopardy. You have number of players, enter your name, though the players are all off camera, so there's no goofy player avatars like in Jeopardy. You might have noticed that both Jeopardy and Wheel, you choose the number of real people playing first, and then you choose whether you want to play against the CPU. So what happens if you choose one player and don't want to play against the CPU? Well, then you're the only contestant, and it's always your turn, so I guess you automatically win every game. Wheel of Fortune is basically Hangman with an element of chance added in. The amount of money that you get for correctly guessing letters is based on what you get when you spin the Wheel of Fortune. Also, a contestant doesn't lose their turn until they guess a wrong letter. So a lucky contestant could win a round without other players ever even getting a turn. I don't know if there's something in this game to prevent that from happening. I thought I was going to lose this round without ever getting a chance to spin, but suddenly the other players both ended their turns by making really bad guesses. Maybe the CPU will deliberately guess incorrect letters after a certain number of correct guesses. As with Jeopardy, this was originally a computer game by shared data. Much of the NES's version's game design was borrowed from the earlier game. We're now on to the speed round, where every player guesses one letter and then tries to solve, no spinning each round. I think this type of round occurs when there's not enough time to do a regular round, like near the end of the episode. I'm going to assume this is the only reference to Norman Mailer ever made in a Nintendo Entertainment System game, but if you know of another one, go ahead and leave a message on the web zone. Wheel of Fortune appears to be aimed at adults as well as kids. I mean, how is any 8-year-old going to be able to guess this answer? Oh, I can win a new Porsche. Nice. It's interesting they use the name of a real car here. Maybe Porsche was a sponsor of Wheel of Fortune, or maybe Rare just slipped it in and no one cared or noticed. The very last round is where you pick 5 consonants and 1 vowel, and then try to guess the answer. And here's the thing, I figured out the answer, but in my excitement I typed in the wrong letter, and I didn't notice it at first, and you can't go back and change just one letter. The back arrow will like erase everything as you go backwards. So I had to make the correction and then retype all the letters afterwards. I guess I was so nervous because I really wanted that new Porsche that I ran out of time. Something that really wouldn't be much of an issue on the computer version, or on the DS where I guess you could like pick out letters with a stylus, or in real life where you could just say the answer. So much like Jeopardy, there's nothing really wrong with the game, other than the fact that the control pad is not really the ideal input for word-based games. How about a military simulation game? But wait, it's not just any old military game, but the granddaddy of Japanese military games. The name is just about impossible for Westerners to pronounce because of that weird RY sound, so I'll approximate it as Daisenryaku, Great War Strategy. I like the trippy, minimalistic music. Kinda reminds me of old Akim Reiko music. The Daisenryaku games are sorta hardcore military games. These are the names of actual jets. Maybe even the stats are accurate. In Famicom Wars, the units are just called Bomber or Fighter, whereas in this game I guess they're going for verisimilitude. This was only released in Japan. We do have a pretty smooth translation from Aeon Genesis. This will sort of make things go a bit easier for us. First thing we noticed, a lot of campaigns, 30. That's a lot for back then. You can choose who plays each color. You can even make the CPU play both, if you want to watch the Famicom play itself. I chose blue, apparently a mistake since red starts off with 4 buildings to blue's 1, so I was sort of screwed from the get-go. You can alternate between the entire map and like the close-up view, where you actually move your units. You start with no units, so the first thing to do is to actually produce some. The buildings make ground units, and the air bases make air units, obviously. But jets and things are really expensive, so you have to sort of stick with ground units, at least at first. You also have to remember what all the names mean. Otherwise you'll be thinking you want to make a tank, and which one of these is a tank again? One thing that tripped me up at first was simply moving the cursor around. Hitting up or down on the D-pad does nothing on the main screen. I had to back up to the map and then move my cursor and zoom in. Eventually I learned that in order to move vertically, you need to use the diagonals on the D-pad, since there's no square directly above you. This makes sense, but it feels clunky and slow when you're playing the game and trying to move around. And you have to press the diagonals perfectly, otherwise it won't register anything at all. Now, the Daisenryaku series was created by a company called Systemsoft, originally on Japanese computers. First game came out on the PC 88, 98, FM7, and so on back in 1986. It must have been successful because Systemsoft started pumping these things out at an incredible rate. This is the PC 88 version of the first game here. Numerous sequels and remakes came out in the late 80s, early 90s on various computers, and a few made it to consoles as well, like Advanced Daisenryaku for the Genesis. The basic formula didn't really change that much. One of the few to make it out of Japan was World Advanced Daisenryaku. They just keep adding more words to the titles. It was a Sega Saturn game and it was called Iron Storm in the US. By this time, fancy 3D graphics were used in battles. And of course, the series continues to this day. The original computer games all used hexagonal shapes on the map, as war games traditionally have. But this version uses squares. I guess the Famicom was not capable of hex-shaped background tiles or something. I mean, I suppose it works, it just looks funny and is difficult to move vertically. So, why should you play the Famicom Daisenryaku today? I don't know. It comes across as a less slick version of Famicom Wars. I know that Famicom Wars was merely following the template already set by the computer Daisenryaku games. Maybe this is more challenging than Famicom Wars. Some of the maps, like the later ones, are just huge. But all in all, this feels sort of like Hydlide, an important game that got ported to the Famicom just a little too late. I suppose that if you get all geeky over military specs, you might want to give this a try. Yeah, it's another Black Bass game. Black Bass 2 in Japan. That very well could be a picture of a bass, but it's certainly not black, it's more like blue. Still, it is a hell of a lot nicer looking than the title art for Black Bass 1. I mean, geez, why is that fish wearing a stereotypical pimp suit? And that music helped get the first Black Bass onto the Chrontendo Worst 10 list. Luckily, the sequel was better and even got a release in the US. Here it was known as Black Bass USA on the title screen, or just the Black Bass on the box art. It also had a less interesting cover. The Japanese box had a surprised-looking kid holding a fish while water poured out of the TV screen, flooding his house. The box art sort of promises a level of realism the game can't really produce, however. So anyway, you sail out onto the lake and pick a spot. Some spots have plentiful bass and others do not. There's a rather simple power meter, kind of like the one in most golf games in Wheel of Fortune when you spin the wheel. You cast your line and then you sort of wiggle around the lure to attract the attention of some fish. Eventually a fish might just bite, then you reel it in, holding down on the button. Basically, you hold the button down for a few seconds until a ting 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 noise is made. Release the button or your line will break. After a few minutes, the fish will be sort of worn down, and the red image of the fish will sort of be transformed into a fish skeleton, but the fish can get away or the line can break. If you have successfully worn down the fish, you can then reel it in all the way. Here I got a rainbow trout. A good fish, I suppose, but in order to win the tournament, you have to catch bass. The manual actually tells you where to find the best spots for the first couple lakes. After that, you have to find them yourself. Also, you sort of need to take into consideration the time of day when choosing a lure, but really the game is not that complicated. I suppose the problem with black bass and fishing games in general is that they're sort of boring. All you do is catch the same fish over and over again. In real life, fishing is not exactly a super exciting sport. It's more like an excuse to sort of get away from it all, drink a few beers, relax, and you get to eat any fish you catch. This video game doesn't really offer any of that. Wow, that is one fast helicopter. It's like parting the ocean. Right, so it's Cobra Command from Data East. Data East being a company that has given us a lot of heartbreak due to their refusal to stop making terrible games. I feel they have a lot of potential. I really liked Karnov, but this game is a different story. Another quickie game that seems aimed at the US market. So we're rescuing hostages in Sumatra of all places. The game seems to take place around Indonesia. So when we start the game up, we see that it's a Choplifter clone. You might recall Choplifter being the old American computer game. It looked basically just like this. So you go around shooting stuff, picking up the occasional hostage. Now here's the weird thing. Cobra Command was originally an arcade game, a Laserdisc arcade game. Remember those, like Dragon's Lair? It's got all this fancy animation. In fact, you have to love the huge disparity between the actual animation and the pre-recorded sound, and then the computer-generated cockpit and sound effects, which sound absolutely horrible. Cobra Command was by the same guy who did Road Avenger, which I think is probably a slightly better remembered Laserdisc game. This later received ports on the Sega CD and the Saturn and the PlayStation. So anyway, the 8-bit Cobra Command might just be about the least faithful arcade port ever. It's really nothing like the original, other than the helicopter theme. I don't even know why they called it Cobra Command. A lot of the action takes place in these underground bases. Probably really not a good idea to take a helicopter in there, because it actually blows up real easily. What? That looked like part of the background, but apparently it was an obstacle. You may have noticed something really strange about this game. When you move forward, the screen stops scrolling for a sec and you end up being at the very edge of the screen. Why did they do this? This makes it much more difficult to dodge enemy fire. You have to evade bullets and whatnot by moving up and down. And the thing is, the vertical controls aren't that hot either. Like here, why can't I hit that damned yellow panel? I tap up, the copter's too high. Tap down, now it's too low. In other words, I really hate this game. Oh yeah, and I looked up a walkthrough on this game to see if there's any way of getting around being stuck on the edge of the screen. And the fix given is just fly backwards instead of forwards, which apparently works. So thanks Data East for making a helicopter game where you have to fly your helicopter in reverse. Did I mention how useless the missiles are? Unless you're right in front of the target, they'll like always miss. Apparently you can get weapons upgrades later, like homing missiles or something, but really anyone who can play this game enough to get to that point really has to have the patience of the saint, and I'm not that person. Okay, here's another weird one for you. Genpei Toumaden, computer board game. Right off the bat, the name is weird, since this isn't a board game style video game, like that Game of Life on the PC Engine. No, this is actually a sort of RPG type thing. There's no rolling dice or cards or any of that sort of thing. Wikipedia says that Namco released an actual board game based on this prior to the video game coming out, but I couldn't find any real confirmation of that. Anyway, in the intro we see the Japanese Imperial regalia, or at least the regalia as they're commonly depicted. No one knows what they really look like, since they are so sacred only the Emperor can look at them. Genpei Toumaden's main character is based on a historical figure, but not a Sengoku-era person. No, he was from the Genpei War era, killed at the battle at Dan no Ura. The Genpei War was a 12th century conflict between Japan's two major clans, Taira and the Minamotos, also called the Haika and the Genjis, as in Tale of the Genji. The war ended with the Minamotos winning and the head of the clan becoming the first shogun. The first Genpei Toumaden game came out in arcades in 1986, a very unusual game in that it alternated between normal side-scrolling hack and slash and a big mode, where you became a giant multi-sprite figure, and top-down action. Apparently, the story behind the game is that you are out to get revenge on the head of the Minamoto clan and retrieve the Imperial regalia. When covering Konami's Getsufu Modern, we noticed some interesting similarities between the two games. Now, when it came time to port this thing to Famicom, Namco completely redesigned it. I guess it ties with Cobra Command as one of the most substantially altered home version of any game. It's now a turn-based RPG, though oddly enough the overworld layout sort of resembles that in Getsufu Modern. You can see enemies on the overworld. That little vortex thing will drop them from time to time. Just like in the arcade game, health is depicted as a series of candles that burn down as you take damage. As you kill monsters, you collect gold and toku, or virtue. In terms of items, the only thing I've seen in this game were scrolls. When facing enemies, your main options are attack and use a scroll, or you can try to run. But at least from what I've seen, there's really no fancy strategy involved in battles. It's all pretty simple. Enemies tend to be a variety of monsters and yokai-type creatures. The scrolls can heal you, or they can do damage to monsters. I'll select one here and attack a monster with it. It does a fair bit of damage. Stopping at these stones will refill your health. It costs some money to do so, but you can refill as little or as much of your health as you want. It's sort of like filling up your gas tank. Stopping by one of the Tori will allow you to spend some toku on improving your stats. One thing I've noticed, the numbers are actually in Japanese. I upped my power to 4, and the rest up to 2. This cost about 200 toku. The game will throw in a really tough enemy from time to time, resulting in a quick death, but you can be brought back to life at one of the Tori. You will, however, lose some golden toku. Also in each level there is a castle in which you'll find a samurai boss. Then you move on to another area. I'm going to need to use a healing scroll here. So once you defeated this guy, you'll come across the big map of Japan in a manner that's very similar to Consaden on the Master System. So Genpei Toumaden is definitely one of the most Japanese games we've seen. It's based on Japanese history and mythology. There's no English text at all in the game, right down to the numbers. Oddly, another Genpei Toumaden game came out on the PC Engine, and this one was released in the US as Samurai Ghost. It's even out on the Virtual Console. As for the Famicom Genpei Toumaden, I'm gonna predict that it's gonna remain completely unknown outside of Japan.
Oh, Dandy, Dandy, when you're gonna give up? Are you feeling old now? You always will.
Just when we thought we were gonna get an episode free of Famicom Disk System games, here we are. Dandy, published by Pony Canyon, but note the Activision credit on the screen. I'm not 100% sure how Activision was involved in this. That's a really horrible logo in my opinion, with a weird A and Y. A little hard to read. So it looks like you're going to be fighting a giant spider at some point in this game. Naturally, Dandy has tons of loading screens and whatnot, so I'll edit all those out as usual. Probably the first thing you'll notice is that, damn, this is one ugly game. Our young hero here leaves home, talks to his family, finds an item in a chest. Dandy would probably be classified as an action RPG, maybe you can think of it as a super crappy version of Falcom's Ease. Though it does use Zelda-style screens. Here we are battling some slimes. One thing you might wonder is what's all that black stuff around the edges that you can't cross over? Ooh, now we have some cobras. This really is one very unpleasant looking game. Now, here's the thing, while this is not very interesting, the backstory is actually quite fascinating. Dandy first saw the light of day as a game by John Palovich for Atari 8-bit computers. It's a dungeon crawler for up to 4 players in which you battle hordes of monsters. If that sounds familiar, then yes, this does appear to be the inspiration for Gauntlet, though Gauntlet was from Atari Games, not Atari Corporation. Then a little later, Electric Dreams released a highly altered version for the Spectrum, CPC, and Commodore 64. Supposedly, this version was developed by a company called Ram Jam. That's a really terrible name for a game company right there. Upon release, it was generally dismissed as being a terrible Gauntlet clone. It's certainly not a very pleasant looking game either. So I guess Pony Canyon licensed the rights from Activision? I assume maybe they somehow own the international rights? Activision did release some Electric Dreams games outside the UK, so presumably Dandy was one of the titles they acquired. It seems this version was done by Atelier Double, who is also responsible for the Famicom Ultima and Winter games. I guess they specialized in cheap-looking ports of American computer games. Now that it's daytime, we can see that black stuff was actually water. Anyway, Dandy's a pretty screwy game with wonky hit detection, so it's not very pleasant to play. Once you get into a dungeon, it actually starts resembling the original game a bit more, though I instantly got killed for some reason. All in all, this is probably really not worth your time. Another FDS game, this time from Jalico. This one uses the old Jalico logo. What? Another helicopter game? This is Big Challenge Dogfight Spirit. We just saw the Big Challenge Judo game a couple episodes ago. I thought Big Challenge was going to be all sports games, but I guess this is actually a shoot-'em-up. So we start by flying over the wilds of Missouri. When you see the supply trucks, those hold power-ups, or bombs. Try to shoot those if you can. I'll get the best power-up here, the spread gun, kind of like in Contra. I call them power-ups, but they're really more like a weapon change. You can even change back to the default pea shooter if you're not careful. Once you have a weapon, there doesn't really seem to be any way of actually upgrading that particular weapon. If you get another one of the same weapon type, it doesn't really change anything. No way to improve its strength. Dogfight Spirit's one of those old-school games that enjoy throwing lots of fast-moving, hard-to-dodge enemies at you from all angles at all times. Ground enemies shoot lots of bullets at you, and the pea shooter is pretty useless, so if you're stuck with that, this is more of a dodging game, rather than a shooting game. Fortunately, you have a shield that can take a bunch of hits, and you have quite a few lives. Bosses are pretty lame, just a bunch of gun ports from what I've seen. The game is kind of like the world's lamest compile shooter. You even get some super fast moving segments like here. You can shoot those ships and get better weapons or bombs, but be careful because it appears you can actually shoot the power-up capsule and destroy it. Also, the capsules are very small and look all kind of similar to each other, so it's difficult to discern what exactly you're grabbing. On regular levels, I think the supply trucks are randomly placed, which means they often appear very close to the edge of the screen and then drive off the screen immediately before you have a chance to shoot them. Since you go back to the pea shooter after you die, and the supply trucks don't appear very frequently, this is pretty frustrating. I think this level is supposed to represent Japan. So, Dogfight Spirit is not the worst shoot-'em-up I've ever seen, but man, this is not that far from the bottom of the list. Aw man, this is not even what I want to have to deal with today. Another Ultraman game. Ultraman Club from Bandai. Love the way Ban appears on one building and Dai appears on the other one. Here's the stage select screen. There's the usual kind of things. There's like forest, glacier, that's the ice level. The whole stage select thing makes it seem kind of Mega Man-ish, I guess. So this is about what you'd expect it to be. A cash-in quickie video game based on a TV show. Well, there wasn't actually an Ultraman Club TV show as far as I know. There were several Ultraman Club games, and as far as I can tell, the concept is that they each contain like multiple characters from across the Ultraman series, so various Ultramen appear. However, once you fire the game up, this is not a side-scrolling action game like all the other Ultraman games we've seen, but a Zelda-ish turn-based RPG-ish sort of thing. The overworld looks pretty boring, and as far as I know, there's no villages or really not much in the way of NPCs. Or at least I didn't see anything like that. Probably the only original thing about this game is the battle mechanic. You have a few different attacks, but when you try to use one, a little crosshair will appear. And you want to aim it on the monster's weak spot. If you hit the enemy right in the weak spot, you'll see a little bandage appear. Once you've injured their weak spots, your attacks in that same spot will then do major damage. Often you want to attack an area like the horns or the weak underbelly on lizard-like creatures, noses, that sort of thing. Hitting the weak points is really the key to killing enemies very quickly. On top of the regular attacks, you have a couple special attacks that do more damage, like the blade attack or the special ray beam attack. These will kill the enemies more quickly, but also expend energy points, and energy functions as your hit points in this game. I assume the enemies are based off things from the TV shows, but what the heck is that? It's like Ultraman on a cross? It's pretty weird. You don't actually attack that guy, by the way. So as the game progresses, you'll find other Ultra dudes to join your party. You can have a party of 3, I believe. Despite the sort of interesting idea of the weak spots, Ultraman Club looks like a very simple, repetitive game. It seems all you do is walk around, fight enemies, until you reach the end of the level. So despite the fact that the battle screen looks kind of like that in Dragon Quest, there really aren't that many similarities. Really, it doesn't seem to be anything to get excited about. Our final game is the big one. As a matter of fact, it's the biggest Nintendo Entertainment System game of all time. The one that every kid with a Nintendo was waiting for. So big, Nintendo even managed to get it promoted in a theatrical movie, The Wizard. The glimpse of the game just drove up anticipation even more. And you couldn't blame kids for being excited. Super Mario Bros. 3 spent around 2 years in development. And then US gamers had to wait almost a year and a half for a US release. It didn't come out over here until early 1990. But being released at the height of Nintendo's domination of the video game market, it was the best-selling video game of all time, at 18 million copies, not counting games that came bundled with the hardware. Though eventually it got knocked out of first place by some Wii game or something. And the quality of the game exceeded pretty much everyone's expectations. It was undoubtedly a Super Mario game, this looks like Super Mario Bros., but it was bigger, better looking, and just with tons of more stuff added in. Consider this, the original Super Mario Bros. Fit on a 320 kilobit cart. It took a 3 megabit cart for Super Mario Bros. 3, plus some extra RAM. And unlike Super Mario 2, this took place in the same universe as the original. All of the same enemies and Mario's techniques were back, plus a whole bunch of new stuff. Part of the fun part of the first game were the various secrets and hidden parts, and Super Mario 3 is even more packed with secrets. There's one on almost every level. You could find hidden lives, special items, and hidden areas. And speaking of items, Mario now has an inventory, and you can collect a variety of items beyond the old mushrooms and fire flowers and stars. There is even a bit of non-linearity to the game. Mario can now move around on an overworld and has a certain amount of freedom in the order he takes on the levels. Most worlds have about 6 to 9 regular levels and a fortress or 2. The final level is always a flying ship belonging to one of the King Koopa's kids. There are no conventional enemies on this level, but instead a series of mounted cannons, flamethrowers, and the like. Once inside the ship, you face one of Bowser's kids. You simply need to stomp on their head about 3 times. You then retrieve the magic wands necessary to transform the king back to his human form. The plot actually does not begin with Princess Peach being kidnapped, or rather, Princess Toadstool as they called her back then. But she eventually does get kidnapped by Bowser, or King Koopa, at the end of the game, providing sort of a plot twist. The princess actually sends you a letter and an item at the end of each world. And there are a number of really hard to obtain secrets, for example the white mushroom houses. They only appear if you obtain all the gold coins on certain levels, like this one here. It's pretty difficult to get all the coins in this level. You have to make a wild jump and hit the very last coins right before they turn back into solid blocks. You have to be really quick. Another ultra secret is the coin ship. It only appears when you get a certain coin/score combination. All the old enemies reappear with tons of bizarre new ones, moving blocks called thwomps, as well as ghosts, originally named Boo Diddley. Another great Mario enemy making their debut here are the Dry Bones, and Chain Chomps, and Bob-ombs as well from Super Mario Bros. 2 appear. A number of new elements beyond just the standard platforming get introduced into the game. The moving spikes, for example. Each fortress ends with a mini-boss battle. These are relatively easy, but as the game progresses you get into things like icy floors and conveyor belts, making that boss battle a bit trickier. Now aside from all this, one of the really great things about Super Mario 3 is the way it's full of surprises. The first time you play this, it's full of what we call oh shit moments, like in this level. First you get thrown backward by a tornado, a bit surprising, and a moment later the sun actually swoops down out of the sky and starts attacking you. In a later level you'll find that some of the blocks actually come to life and jump on you. The game is constantly playing against our expectations. After encountering something over and over again in games, it's suddenly different here. Super Mario 3 is like the I wanna be the guy of the 8-bit game era. So let's step back a bit and ask ourselves, why is this game so special? How is it different than, say, Zelda 2? Well, looking back at the history of Nintendo, they always had a bit of an odd attitude towards sequels. Take Donkey Kong, a huge hit involving a guy running and jumping. The sequel, Donkey Kong Jr., changes up quite a bit. Gameplay-wise, it feels like a completely different game. The next game, Donkey Kong 3, well, other than the presence of Donkey Kong, it really bore no resemblance to the first two. Or Zelda 2. Nintendo felt the need to completely rework the formula, to the point where it's really entirely possible to love the first game, but detest Zelda 2. And Super Mario Bros., a whacked-out sequel to just regular old Mario Bros., but the Japanese sequel was really just a harder version of the same game. It's more like a modern-day ROM hack than a true sequel. But with Super Mario 3, Nintendo finally got the sequel business just right. If you love the first game, everything from the first game was still here, and then a whole lot of new stuff was added on. You're still stomping on Koopas, dropping down pipes, getting lost in castles. It just strikes the perfect balance between nostalgia and innovation. Donkey Kong Jr. didn't do this, Zelda 2 certainly didn't do this, but Mario 3 did, and Link to the Past did. Super Mario 3 would provide the template for future Nintendo sequels, right up to the current Super Mario Galaxy games. Mario himself looks more like quote-unquote Mario in this game. Compare the sprites for Mario's 1, 2, and 3. He looks about the same in Mario 2 and 3, which makes sense because, remember, the US Mario 2 came out about the same time as Mario 3 did in Japan. So how does Mario 3 expand on Super Mario Bros.? No, obviously new enemies for one, like these guys who will quickly fire off a projectile at you. And each enemy has to be dealt with a little differently. These guys' projectiles move differently than the Piranha Plant's fireballs, or the cannonballs, or the bullets, or the Hammer Brothers. As before, there are hidden vines that take you to secret parts of the level. But look at this, you find a bunch of coins in the clouds, but then there's a bounce block that takes you to an even higher level of clouds and more coins. and the fact that you can now fly with the raccoon tail opens up many more possibilities for hidden areas in the clouds. Underwater levels also become much more involved and complex. The fact that you can now move both to the left and the right, not just to the right, means there's more hidden stuff here. The exit's to the right, but head left instead and you'll find this pipe, which will lead you to an underground chamber with a frog suit. That's one of 3 suits in this game. It gives you much better control while swimming. The other 2 are the Tanuki suit and the Hammer Brothers suit. Here's the 4th boss, Windio Koopa. In the US, the Koopa Kids were named after either talk show hosts or musical figures, including people that are nearly forgotten today, like Morton Downey Jr., obnoxious TV talk show host, or Windio Williams of the gimmicky punk band The Plasmatics, who were pretty well known at one time. Now things start to get crazy in World 5, Skyland. Your path on the overworld appears to dead end into this ziggurat, but once you get to the top you'll find a vine and a pipe that leads up into the air. And then the second part of the world is up in the clouds, with the ground visible far below you. Naturally, this means that levels are not really set on terra firma. The one level contains a pipe that drops you back down to the ground level for a bit, so falling to your death is a common theme in the sky levels. Now before too long we get a new kind of block, one that drops you if you stand on it for more than a second, as well as frozen coins your fireballs will thaw out. With all the secret stuff found in the game, Super Mario 3 is very generous with coins, 1-ups, and power-ups. I mean, look at all the coins this switch gives you. If you then hurry up and beat the timer, you can get down that pipe and get a Hammer Brothers suit, which are completely awesome. You can now throw hammers and kill enemies that fireballs can't, like the Boo Diddleys. And the level design doesn't repeat itself, like this moving floor. This is the only time in the game this happens. They don't reuse every good idea over and over again. Instead, they keep coming up with fresh new ideas. What a crazy concept. One funny thing, if you finish up a level with one of the special suits on, the king's dialogue will be a bit different. There's all sorts of little details like that. That's part of what makes the game so great. Now, Super Mario Bros. 3 is a harder game than the first one. Luckily, the game gives you tons of extra lives. It's also much longer, almost 90 levels by my count. Now, the levels are shorter than those of the first Mario, but take this into consideration. An all-level speedrun for Super Mario is about 20 minutes. For Mario 2, about 26 minutes. For Mario 3, an hour and 24 minutes. So aside from being incredibly long, there's no sort of save feature. Now, normally if you're actually playing the game without any kind of save states, you would use the warp whistles to make it possible to finish in a reasonable amount of time. Once you've found the whistles, you can just go ahead and warp straight to level 8. Though of course the warp whistles are reasonably well hidden. Another very helpful item is the cloud, which allows you to simply skip one level. If you're having a really tough time on a level, just use the cloud and go past it. There's also a 2-player mode. Like the first game, players alternate, but they both use the same overworld map. So player 1 can, for example, play level 1, then player 2 can play level 2, so they take turns working towards the end of the game. When both players stand on the same square, this will start a competitive version of the original Mario Bros. And you can actually steal the other player's cards. Now, later levels do get quite a bit harder, like this weird fortress with no enemies that ends in a dead end. Turns out there's a hidden switch that turns everything into coins. I mean, man, look at all those coins. This will reveal an otherwise hidden door. Or this level, where you need to reach the very top of the room using a series of moving platforms. And this sort of thing just shows the enormous leap in creativity when it came to level design. There's really absolutely nothing like this in the original Super Mario Bros. On this level, you have to have the star power activated for pretty much the entire thing. And you need to move very quickly in order to reach the next star in time. This level is sort of a maze made out of pipes. Exploration will lead you to tons of coins, extra lives, and so on. A lot of this stuff is hard to find, but Remember, the game was designed to be played out over and over again and retain its entertainment value for weeks and weeks and weeks. So it's not a game you'd be able to get through the first time you played it. You'd have to discover things, find the warp whistles, that sort of stuff. It would take you a while. Now by the time you reach the last level, you should have quite a few extra lives. I only have 66, but it's really not that hard to get the full 99. If you get the star at the end of each level, that means 5 lives every 3 levels. World 8 has a few of these forced scrolling levels where you make your way past Bowser's army, navy, and air force. I mean, man, just look at the giant cannons on these things. The game is visually pretty impressive. And it does start getting pretty hard near the end. That's when some of these items come in handy. I would highly recommend using the P-Wing to help you fly over this level. There's just too many chances to fall to your death. Finally, you'll reach Bowser's castle, and then the game throws lasers at you. Bowser has laser technology? Really? The final castle is not too bad. It's not nearly as maze-like as some of the earlier fortresses. There's a few tricky jumps here and there, and Bowser himself is a little anticlimactic. Though I suppose the first time you encounter him you might try jumping on him like all the other bosses in the game. But still, look how well animated he is compared to the first game. Really, Mario 3 is one of those rare games where everything comes together. The art, the music, the level design. It's fun, no two levels are really alike. It's extremely replayable, you can always find new hidden stuff the more you play it. Player experimentation is rewarded. The game gives you much more choice as to how you want to play the game. There are multiple paths on the overworld, so you don't even have to play every single level. The fact that the development time was so long gave Miyamoto and company the chance to make everything as close to perfect as possible. And it's certainly vastly superior to every other side-scrolling platformer we've seen so far. I mean, it's been many years since I've played this game, and it still holds up as well today as any other game of this era. Is this the best NES game ever? Well, that's a matter of personal opinion, but it was certainly the most anticipated, fondly remembered, and well-received game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. So, there you go. Now, where can we go from here? Nowhere but down, I guess. But don't worry, we've still got good stuff coming up next time. How about a Sengoku-era strategy game? Ooh, that sounds nice. Maybe a shooting game from Konami? And this is new, an adventure game from Capcom of all people. And then another adventure game that many of you know and love. So, we'll see you then.